Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday. We made it all the way to Thursday. Thursday, February 8th, 2024. Time to do it all over again. And big day today. We're going to have our show interrupted. We're not going to have our show. Well, I will not stand. I'm not going to stand here. I will not sit here and listen to you, Donald Trump, come before the Supreme Court of the United States and badmouth America. I don't know. Anyway, today is at 10 o'clock. Supreme Court arguments in the 14th Amendment disqualification case, the Section 3 disqualification case of Donald Trump. And he's going to send some jackass to the Supreme Court and come up with a stupid explanation for why he should be allowed to run for president as an insurrectionist. And I guess we all sit here and sit on our hands and wait for finding out whether the robed figures decide that we should or shouldn't have a future as a democracy. So, you know, it's kind of a day. Things will happen. I imagine some of you will want to listen to this thing live. Maybe you'll return to us via podcast to hear us complaining about how we can't just listen to this thing. I don't know. Maybe we can just do, I guess it's public domain thing. We could just play the audio and comment on it, but I think it would be boring radio. I mean, I imagine, I don't know, I haven't been to Supreme Court hearings, so I imagine like the first 5 or 10 minutes of it could be like shuffling papers, and we all say, we're waiting now for the justices to, I don't know, they already took their seats, so I don't know what we're waiting for them to take their shoes off and put their feet up on the, so, okay, I don't know. Anyway, that's going to be going on today. The decision will not be made today. That means there's still time to read commentary on what the justices should and shouldn't do with respect to the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, plenty of other things to round up. Things in the news. I don't know what people are squawking about this morning, per se. But, no one unifying theme on social media that I can tell. So we'll invite Greg Dworkin to come in with his raft of stories and get us all wrapped up. And let's say Justice might have some suggestions about things, as he usually does. Let's see. Oh, yes, right. This is true. There are definitely some things to discuss here. First story suggestion up here. Biden AI deepfake. Yes, I just picked up on that from the morning. So I guess there was some morning chatter, although here the chatter and the innuendo is that it was done by Brad Parscale. Is that like substantiated by some reporting somewhere? I don't think I even noticed the story, but apparently during the New Hampshire primary, some robocalls using probably AI to generate a fake Biden voice, essentially telling people you don't have to vote in the primary. Don't worry about it. Not going to make a difference, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what that really yields you. Next to nothing, apparently, is the actual answer here. But it's worrisome and dangerous. And I did put aside an article that I saw accompanying this. It's just essentially worrying that perhaps the next election cycle will be, well, totally screwed up by AI, including, I guess, the ability to marry AI to the kind of political advertising, targeting, and manipulation that we heard about in the first Trump election, 2016 in particular, and Brad Parscale being behind a lot of it. They attempted the same in 2020, but just the idea of individualizing and testing, multiple hundreds of models of manipulative advertising and micro-targeting people with this stuff, and that AI could be doing the hard work of generating the content to experiment with, and you might have something of a monster on your hands. I can't explain it quite as well as reading a thoroughly researched and extremely long article to you can do, but perhaps we'll spend our time on that while the Supreme Court decides whether or not we have a country. Greg Dworkin is here for the first hour, maybe the last hour of the country as well. Let's make good use of it. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
There it is.
I can't find any specific news stories about Brad Parscale being.
But it's a good bet.
Yeah, it's not a bad guess, but maybe something will come out. Maybe I just missed it, and we'll see. But I think
the story itself, so who knows? Yeah.
What we need to start the show with is defeating the previous question, so I can now add amendments, and the floor is now open for debate.
Okay.
And, why is that important? Because that's basically, I think, the way forward for getting some Ukraine aid.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because what's going to happen today, right now this morning.
What's going on?
Starting at 9:30, not at 10 o'clock, but at 9:30.
Earlier. Good.
The senators on the Republican side are going to get together and say, look, we have this cluster screw up here, and we have no idea what the path forward is. Some of us, like Langford, are really upset that we're not getting this seriously done. We're all serious about wanting Ukraine aid. It's just some of us want to tie it to some border issues, but we just did that and it failed. And the others of us simply want to open it up for some kind of amendments. And the sort of amendments we're thinking about is, okay, we'll pass it, but we need to embarrass Democrats along the way. So we have to make them vote for stuff that they'll regret.
Okay.
And that's the purpose of adding amendments to this bill that we all know is going to pass.
Yeah.
And we can't figure out quite how to do that yet. And we only have a few hours. We couldn't figure it out last night. We just started screaming at each other. So Schumer said, all right, I'll tell you what, children, why don't you go home, do your homework, come back here at 1 o'clock, and then we'll figure out the way forward. And so that's basically what happened yesterday. And so something might pass today, something might not. It's hard to say. It's not only the Senate, it's the Republican Senate, so who knows? But should something pass, because there are apparently serious people who want to seriously do this in a serious way, and something actually passes, God forbid, passes the Senate, then goes over to the House, defeating the previous question and discharge petition are the two ways to get it done, and defeating the previous question is fast. Discharge petitions take a while.
That's true. Got to get everybody lined up and signing the thing. And they very rarely get the last signatures that they need because people know exactly, what the consequences are. Whereas, same consequences in defeating the previous question, but it's easier to do sort of on the spot. Will you cast this crazy vote? Oh, all right. What the hell? Sometimes, very rarely it happens.
Right.
Almost never.
So Representative Don Bayer has a deputy chief of staff named
Aaron
Frischner, who's very active on Twitter.
Okay.
And helpful a lot of times because he explains what's going on.
All right.
So he says, look, the future of the Republicans' push to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, and that was part of the cluster screw-up yesterday.
Yes. Aruga. Yes.
Is, in my opinion, Aaron Frischner's opinion, more complex than it seems. The question of when they might try again could vary greatly based on procedural, practical, electoral, and political factors. Some thoughts with an explanation of why none of it matters.
Oh, LOL YOLO.
Right? First of all, Steve Scalise won't be back in the Capitol right away, meaning House GOP won't yet bring the Mayorkas impeachment resolution back to the floor. Remember, there was discussion when it failed that, we'll just bring it up tomorrow.
Sure.
Well, no, Scalise is not going to be back. In fact, he's probably not going to be back this week.
Well, they didn't count the first time. Why count the second? Just go.
So here's the procedural thing.
All right.
The guy that we were trying to remember his name, Blake Moore.
If that is his real name.
If that's his real name. It's weird. Everybody on the Republican side is named like Skipper and
Blake
Chip
Skippyson.
Roy and, Biff Muldoon.
They do have some odd ones. Although
anyway,
we had Dutch
last night's vote failed
2015-2015.
Blake Moore changed his vote so he could seek reconsideration of the resolution, which he then did. Then he went and explained it to his constituents, and that was tough. Because,
Yeah.
I voted for it before I voted against it.
I like that
because,
one, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, he's right, and I get it, but yeah, 2.5 minutes to do the...
It's one thing to do it, which is, what he did here.
Yeah.
He moved to reconsider the vote on adoption of H-Res 863, which is the impeachment.
Yes.
The Speaker put the question on the motion, and on demand of Representative Moore, the House ordered the yeas and nays, and as soon as that happened, the Speaker postponed the vote. Under Clause 8 of Rule 20.
Wow, my favorite.
So basically, what does that mean? Okay. That means that you can hold that vote for 2 days. 2 days are up.
Okay. Oh. Already?
Yeah.
Feels like just 2 days ago. Yeah, okay. Oh, I see. All right, good.
Right, and Scalise isn't here. So now
it's also good.
You could just ignore the rules. That's one way to do it. Because, that's not usually how things work. But these days in the House, that's how it works. But the plain text reading of the rules is you can't do that. So if they do figure out a procedure, which is basically to bring it back next week in some fashion, then you have problems. Representative Hal Rogers is out because he was in a car accident, Republican.
Yes, right.
Steve Scalise is out, and he'll be back next week, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You can never tell how you're going to respond to chemotherapy.
Right, yes.
Right? And Aaron Frischner points out Scalise isn't the only piece in motion on the board. As a matter of fact, both sides have multiple members of medical issues. Remember Al Green's dramatic appearance to save Mayorkas. But both sides will have members with family or unexpected commitments that arise because that's life.
Right.
And the last time the House had all but one member present and voting was 2 months ago.
Yeah, that's typically the case. Very, very, very rare. If you ever look at, well, it's also very rare for people to look at roll call votes, but extremely rare for there to be no one listed as not voting.
Well, the point is Mike Johnson,
435
who is still wet behind the ears, is trying to game out what happens when everybody's there.
Yeah.
And Aaron Frischner is saying, listen, kid, everybody's not going to be there.
Yeah.
And you don't even know who's not going to be there.
That is true,
too. You didn't know who was not going to be there the other day because Al Green showed up and you didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's ways of finding out, and they're not perfect, but another one, by the way, is picking up the phone and calling members and asking them,
but things happen between the phone call you made and the vote.
Sometimes.
Oh,
yeah.
I had an unexpected emergency. I didn't know my father was going to die after you called me.
Or I hate you, but I didn't want you to know I hated you, so I said yes, but I meant no.
Right. Anyway, Frischner looks at this and says people are gaming out scenarios where Scalise returns and all members are present, but that's highly unlikely. And it assumes no Republicans change their position either.
Right.
And this is shaky ground. So that's the procedural part. Then there's the electoral part. 4 vacancies in the House. New York 3 is Tuesday. The next special election is New York 26, but that's not until mid to late April. Mm-hmm. And both of those happen before red seat vacancies get filled in Ohio and California. So how quickly, let's say the Democrat wins, which is not a sure thing, as we talked about the other day. But let's say George Santos' seat in New York 3 is filled by a Democrat. How long does it take to seat him? And the answer is it depends.
Right.
It can take up to 10 days for New York State to certify the election. Mm-hmm. And so he won't be back right away either, so you can't count on an extra Democratic vote from Tom Suozzi if he wins right away. But the reason none of it matters is the whole point of this, Frischner says, the whole point of this whole exercise on Mayorkas was show. It was a sham. Everybody understands that there's no grounds to impeach him. This was a messaging bill that they couldn't get done. And so, not Frischner's, but my take is, imagine you're a comedian. You get on stage and you try to tell a joke, and you screw it up and you tell the punchline early without doing the setup properly, and then you say to the audience, wait a minute, let me do that again.
That'd be funny.
It's not funny.
Oh, I think the joke isn't funny, but the joke
because
of
now you know the
standing there is funny. Yeah. Well, that's true.
You can laugh at the guy who did it. That's what we're doing with Republicans in Congress. But the joke isn't funny.
Oh, right.
It fails because you have to pull it off the first time.
Well, timing is everything, they say.
Timing is everything. So the fact that they screwed up the messaging means it's not going to work. And so what Frischner says is the simple fact is Republicans have utterly botched, blown, and bungled this impeachment for political messaging purposes. Yeah, they could sneak it past us when Dean Phillips isn't here, or rush Scalise back from cancer treatment, or even do it later. But it doesn't matter. They already blew it.
Not to mention the fact that, I mean, if you have something as, well, because it's a show bill and a messaging bill, I guess it doesn't make any sense to think of it this way. But if you had something as momentous as impeachment, you wouldn't want to be doing that with a shoestring budget for votes, essentially. You know, that should be an overwhelming vote. It should be a bipartisan vote, they often say. But it doesn't have to be if you have a sizable majority. You don't. So this just isn't the solution to your problems, and it never was going to be, which you knew from voting, counting heads in the Senate, obviously.
Well, there's another issue here, and that is, again, Mike Johnson has been exposed, along with the rest of the Republican House, as people who can't count.
Yes, or don't care to.
They don't know how many votes they have because they can't count them properly.
That's right. God told me 3 was bigger than 5. He was wrong. What can I tell you?
And he was wrong.
But he'll be right next time.
Where does that leave us? It leaves us, listen, this is a piece I wrote in January 23, 2017.
Okay.
2017. The headline was, of the abbreviated pundit rundown, was Donald Trump Chaos Agent.
Yes.
You may remember this.
I remember the idea. Yeah.
And the whole concept is, look, he's a chaos agent. He's not here to make change in any way, shape, or form. He's not a change agent. He's a chaos agent. So this is Semaphore from today, the news outlet.
I don't do
As Republicans stumble, Democrats look to make 2024 a referendum on chaos.
Hey.
President Biden has long pitched himself as the steady alternative to Donald Trump's nonstop chaos. A spate of self-induced Republican drama is giving that argument some new heft now. This week alone, Republicans upended a major border deal negotiated by their own members, failed to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas thanks to a combination of internal dissent and vote-counting mishaps, and a MAGA-led effort to oust RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, which has reached fever pitch. Trump's multi-front legal battles also continue to make daily headlines, including a resounding court loss for his argument the president should enjoy substantial legal immunity. It's not just a chaotic week. Kate Berner, who held communications roles in Biden's 2020 campaign in the White House, told Semaphore, it's chaotic because Donald Trump and congressional Republicans and MAGA Republicans can't govern and can't deliver results for the American people. And we've already seen Democrats begin to tie this week's events into that core argument. House Democrats will continue to choose common sense solutions to solving problems. House Republicans continue to choose chaos, Hakeem Jeffries told reporters on Wednesday. So there's several parts of this. The only saving grace for Republicans is, like, except for you and me, and I don't know about you sometimes.
Maybe I don't even know.
And I don't know about me sometimes. Nobody pays attention to Congress.
Right. I have stopped. Mostly. I let Joan tell me.
What for? They don't get anything done. So unless there's like
really
a shutdown or something really big happening, like somebody, resigns, the public doesn't know. But Democrats making this part of the campaign will make them know. That's one part.
Maybe.
The other part, which perhaps is even more important, is in the process of lying to everybody, including Democrats, they've also lied to reporters. So now the Republicans have pissed off the press, and you can see it because all of a sudden, the stories, like the one I just read to you, it's just one of many, many, many that are just incredibly harsh. I mean, they're actually pointing to the GOP and saying, hey, you're the guys who are blocking things.
There was a time when they said, hey, I almost got murdered at work yesterday and it's your fault. But, well, that has faded.
That's faded. And usually it's Congress can't get anything done.
Right.
That's their go-to.
That's true. I mean,
and that's not what the
true.
New York Times says this morning. Senate bogs down on Ukraine and Israel aid after GOP blocks border deal.
There you go. All right.
That's actually rather revolutionary these days. But it's only one of many. The chaos story from Semaphore, this one from the New York Times, all over the place. Right? This one is AP. Abandoned by his colleagues after negotiating a border compromise, GOP senator faces backlash alone. That's all the Jim Langford stuff that we were talking about here. Let's see. This is Washington Post. GOP leaders face unrest amid chaotic, bungled votes. These are pretty harsh headlines, considering it's usually Congress unable to pass things.
Yes, right.
This
at an impasse.
No. This is pointing at the GOP and saying it's your fault. That's new.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. Couldn't you have difficulty
it's true,
getting
but it's also relatively
Barack Obama
unusual.
to say that? Yeah, all right. So good. It sets up nicely. That's, so it comes and goes. Maybe it has no, you don't see a huge societal impact, but as you constantly remind us, it only needs to work on a few people.
And it takes time to sink in because adults learn by repetition.
That is true. How?
As you know.
How did you say? I didn't get that.
Okay. Repetition. Like we keep learning by repetition.
Yeah. All right. So what? I didn't hear you.
That we learn by repetition.
What? You're kidding.
No.
Someone should write that down. What was it again? I've forgotten. Yeah.
I don't know. I better.
At any rate, it's true, and people, look, I'm unmoved because I have been seeing the headlines. Somebody else is just waking up and seeing the headlines for the first time. What? The GOP is to blame? Yeah. Well, you and 6 other people realized that today. Tomorrow, another half a dozen. Eventually, something happens. And in a close election, I'll take it. It's certainly better headlines than we've gotten, and for which there was never any justification. Mysterious thing happens in Congress. No one knows how.
Going back to Semaphore, what they say, in addition, is the chaos focus is also one that Nikki Haley, Trump's only remaining main opponent in the primary race, you remember her, the one that couldn't beat none of the above in Nevada.
Right. But
has begun honing.
That stays in Nevada.
And the Biden campaign seems more than happy she's picking up the mantle. On Wednesday, the Biden campaign promoted multiple Haley comments on the topic on what they call X, what I call Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
In one, she posted, "A vote for Trump is a vote for more chaos," citing some of the drama that unfolded that week at the behest of the former president.
He's a chaos agent.
Typically, failures in Congress get blamed on whoever's in office, regardless of who's at fault, and Biden's running for re-election under a different light than 2020, but he's betting on a bank shot argument this time that offloads responsibility to his opponent, who, as a court ruling put this week, is now Citizen Trump and has no legal authority. It's a risky bet, especially if voters interpret it as passing the buck. That's bullshit. That is such bullshit.
Wow, that is horrible.
It's horrible. It's not a risky bet. It's a smart bet.
I like it's a
so
bank shot.
Freaking obvious what's going on here.
Yeah, and it was your headline a minute ago. All right.
Right. Read your own damn headline.
Wow. You can't blame this on... No one's ever done this except for yesterday's article when we were like, Harry Truman did
Harry
this.
Truman.
Yeah. Everybody has written their Harry Truman article, and now the next day is like, no one knows what to do. We've never seen this before.
Nobody knows how this is going to play. Well, of course we do.
All right. Well,
now, this is a very interesting piece here by an interesting guy named David Beer, B-I-E-R.
Okay.
Who is an immigration expert, a conservative, libertarian-style immigrant, but very honest.
Oh, boy. All right. That's fine.
He's actually been very good on a lot of these issues.
It happens. Yes.
And he's writing at The Unpopulist. I followed him for a long time, so this isn't a one-off. Secretary Mayorkas is being impeached for following the law on border enforcement. Republicans are the ones making unconstitutional demands. Yeah. We talked the other day about the fact that one of the reasons that the Senate would be well within its rights not even pay attention to this sham message bill is that the articles of impeachment they drew up are so incoherent that you can't even do anything with them.
Yeah.
And this is sort of looking at how that works.
All right.
While Senate Republicans are busy derailing a bipartisan border security bill yesterday, their House colleagues were voting to impeach the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, over his border policies. The motion was narrowly defeated 214 to 216, so they're vowing to try again. Another reminder to me, really, but also to the listeners, unlike the Senate where the vice president breaks a tie is a loss in the House.
Yes.
So it was 215, and that's a loss. That means the bill does not pass.
Right.
And that's why Blake Moore, whose name we now know, at least for a couple of more days before we forget it again, changed his vote to be able to bring it up again, which they can't do because they still don't have the votes.
But he
just
explained it
everybody's
so
clear
nicely.
on this.
Yeah. By the way, I saw the comments on his video were hilarious. It did not work.
It didn't go well.
No.
So Mayorkas would have been the first government official to be impeached for actually staying within the bounds of the Constitution. In fact, it's the Republicans who are making unconstitutional demands. In the impeachment articles they drafted, they alleged that Mayorkas failed to block immigrants entering not just illegally but legally and detain them in inhumane and unconstitutional conditions rather than release them. And even more absurd than the allegation is the fact that in the process of making them, Republicans repeatedly misstated the law, quoted overturned court decisions, and hilariously confused DHS Secretary Mayorkas' actions with those of Secretary of State Anthony Blinken.
Oh.
All of this proves just how Orwellian our political discourse in immigration has become. Let's go through these allegations, and then they go through them in detail.
Well, that's the way to do it.
House Republicans claim that Mayorkas is releasing immigrants in explicit violation of congressional mandates requiring their detention. The problem is that DHS would need 1.5 million detention beds, and they funded 34,000.
Oh. Is that what direction does that go? That's less?
Well, 34,000 is less than
fewer?
1.5 million. I'm not explaining this to you, David. I'm explaining this to Mike Johnson, who can't count.
Well, look, that guy thought 2 of every animal fit on a boat.
So you can't complain that Mayorkas isn't doing what Congress mandated. Congress never mandated the money. That comes from the House, doesn't it? That's where money starts.
True, right? Purse strings. What house? Where am I? How did I get here? Why am I Speaker of the House?
Letting the days go by.
Aye. All right. Well, chaos. We love it. All right. Well, 2 minutes of non-chaos. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Are they pre-gaming over at the Supreme Court? I don't know. There should be a channel like Terry Bradshaw on there giving predictions, something like that. It feels ridiculous that
here's the injury report.
Yeah, there's like 3 hours of pre-game for the Super Bowl. Here's a Supreme Court argument deciding whether or not an insurrectionist can run for president.
Thomas is in the ineligible roster.
Yeah,
and, we're waiting for the injury report back, but.
Right, and we're kind of hoping that he's on both, as a matter of fact. Why not? Sure, that's the only way he's going to recuse himself is if he falls down the stairs on the way there. But not happening. Okay.
Anyway.
Yes.
You know what else is in the news? Tracy Chapman's fast car is back up at the top of the charts for a few months. So there's some good news this morning.
That's nice.
The original.
All right. Great. Everyone rediscovering that it was what? Yeah, I love when that happens and some new generation discovers that there was
the Beatles.
An original of this thing. Yeah.
Hey, the Beatles, these guys were good.
Right. Well, and sometimes you have to do detective work to find out the original, as when, for instance, years ago, and I guess probably still happening, lots of people will tell you about the stories of black artists who had their work stolen, re-recorded by white artists, and then
exactly right. And that's why Luke Combs' duet with Tracy Chapman was so important. Luke Combs' version is number 20, and during the duet they had during the Grammys, he clearly not only did it in her style, not only didn't try to step over her, only was doing supportive stuff, but was just so clearly touched at being on the same stage with her that you can't even think of him appropriating her work.
Cool. Okay. I like that approach. Yeah, as opposed to pretending you're the one who wrote the masterpiece.
But you know the classic example of that, which will never be topped. Pat Boone doing Tutti Frutti.
I don't believe I'm familiar, but I know where it comes from.
Me, but you should
Holy
go
moly,
see
Pat
it
Boone
on YouTube. It'll make you laugh.
Okay.
Did Pat Boone really write that? No, he didn't.
Well, I never
Did he
believed
do this
that.
first? No, he didn't do this first.
That would be interesting. It'd be interesting to come to the conclusion that he'd done anything first, but okay.
Exactly. Anyway.
Wow, all right, Pat Boone.
Tutti Frutti? Really?
Yeah. Well, we're the Debbie Boone generation anyway. Anyways.
David Beeren, looking at the Mayorkas situation, notes that the courts have repeatedly slapped Border Patrol, and especially the Trump administration. This is the same Border Patrol union that endorsed the plan that Biden had. For violating the Constitution by detaining people in horrific conditions where they're deprived of sleep or adequate food and hygiene. The Constitution's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment wouldn't allow such treatment for convicted murderers, let alone people detained for a civil violation or of a regulation. In other words, Republicans are suggesting that following the Constitution is an impeachable offense.
Oh,
that's a problem.
I believe that they would believe that, sure.
Yeah. During the markup on the impeachment bill, some Republicans admitted it would be impossible to detain every single border crosser, but they felt Mayorkas wasn't putting in enough effort. This is despite the fact that Mayorkas has unfortunately been detaining and forcibly removing more immigrants than any administration since 2001.
Right.
Republicans also accused Mayorkas of violating the law by prioritizing enforcement against more recent border crossers and those who pose a genuine public safety or security threat. They want no prioritization at all. Never mind that Congress has required DHS to prioritize.
Yes. Never mind it.
The committee that drafted the articles of impeachment cited an appeals court decision briefly blocking Mayorkas' enforcement strategy in U.S. v. Texas, and the Supreme Court reversed that ruling 8-1. Indeed, that 2023 ruling correctly noted the executive branch does not possess the resources necessary to arrest or remove all of the non-citizens. Mm-hmm. That reality isn't an anomaly, it's a constant. For the last 27 years, since the mandates were enacted, all 5 presidential administrations have determined that resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests. But the impeachment articles aren't done quoting overturned court decisions.
Oh, I know.
They also claim that Mayorkas violated the law by releasing immigrants from detention on parole, handing them temporary permission to enter and stay. And they cite another appeals court decision in Biden v. Texas to back its position, and that decision, too, was unequivocally repudiated by the Supreme Court. The law, the court said, expressly authorizes DHS to process applicants for admission under a third option, parole. Every administration, including the Trump and Biden administration, has utilized the authority to some extent.
Very interesting. So a poorly written impeachment, of course, which ought to be considered a brief in support of their case, it would get you sanctioned if you were practicing in front of a court.
Right. Now, the second article of impeachment, titled Breach of Public Trust, is a dumping ground of disconnected gripes.
I don't like that guy.
It charges Mayorkas is knowingly making false statements to Congress that the border is secure, that the border is closed, and that DHS has operational control of the border. The articles point to a 2006 statute that defines operational control to mean the prevention of every single illegal crossing. And that's such an over-the-top, unrealistic definition that Border Patrol internally has used different definitions for years. Now, Mayorkas admitted that by the statute's observed standards, DHS lacks operational control, but by that standard, no administration has ever achieved control. Right. And by the way, ever could.
No.
But House Republicans don't stop here with their bogus accusations. They make 3 more. 1, they claim Mayorkas terminated remain in Mexico. Actually, the Mexicans don't want it.
Oh, all right.
Okay. 2, they assert that Mayorkas caused the border crisis by canceling the construction of Trump's border wall. But that decision was taken before Mayorkas assumed office.
Well.
3, they claim Mayorkas terminated asylum cooperative agreements that allowed DHS to deport asylum seekers to third countries. Somehow or other, I'm reminded of Britain's Suella Braverman trying to send people to Rwanda. But that accusation suggests a whole new level of confusion because these agreements were either never implemented at all, as was the case with El Salvador and Honduras, were suspended during the Trump administration after the removal of 945 people. More significantly, it was Secretary of State Blinken who terminated these agreements, not Mayorkas. So, and then he goes on to go over what some of the other predecessors did that were, in the same ballpark. So Mayorkas isn't, by himself doing bad things while nobody else ever did. And he concludes by saying, Mayorkas has made a share of mistakes, but they're nothing compared to the deliberate and lawless campaign to destroy the immigration system that his predecessor engaged in. Illegal immigration is so high because legal immigration is impossible. But the Trump administration's actions made it even harder, something that has no doubt contributed to the current crisis. If anything, Mayorkas has used his authority more than anybody else to fix things, though obviously not enough. Impeachment shouldn't require a criminal act, but describing Mayorkas' lapses as a high crime or misdemeanor stretches these terms beyond any reasonable interpretation. That's what I mean about being a conservative and libertarian, but not an unreasonable person.
Okay. That's a good explanation. There's interesting implications, too, for some of the other things happening in front of the courts. It's interesting also how he points out how frequently Republicans, in supposedly making their case for impeachment, rely on overturned precedent, which, like I said, would get you in serious trouble in front of any court, which is a good reminder of, as it happens, why Donald Trump's claims that he should have immunity from prosecution because his impeachment and then later indictment constitutes double jeopardy, why the court, D.C. Circuit Court, rejected that so forcefully just yesterday, pointing out that not only are the two things of completely different nature, but that even if they really were of a similar nature, the difference is obvious. You can get away with, because there's nobody to punish you with sanctions, coming up with total nonsense reasons either for lodging the impeachment in the first place or voting not to convict in the Senate. And as they were pointing out, it's no kind of criminal trial when you're on trial in front of members of your own party who, in the face of overwhelming evidence that you're guilty, simply say, I don't feel like holding him guilty. I feel like letting him go. And then saying, well, there you go. That's just like a fair trial. Well, you can see why it's not. And here, right, we've impeached Mayorkas based on things that were reversed by the Supreme Court 8-1. You try citing that in court, you'll get bounced out and your lawyer will be sanctioned.
Well, this is to me like Matt Gaetz passing a resolution saying Trump didn't do an insurrection. Well, which, I know you said it.
Right.
And it's official because it's in the congressional record.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it true, real, or reliable in any way, shape, or form.
But it only helps illustrate how the forum of Congress is nothing like the forum of a court. You can't get away with doing it. It doesn't happen in a court. Unless, of course, it's the Supreme Court, in which case, maybe you can buy that if you want.
So Jeff Stein chimes in on the issue, not deliberately, but happens to. He tweets yesterday, due largely to an unexpected surge in immigration, the U.S. economy will be about $7 trillion larger.
Oh, no.
Federal revenues about $1 trillion bigger. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said Wednesday. That impacts over 10 years, to be clear. It doesn't take into account any legislation Congress may do.
You're all fired.
More workers means more output, and that in turn leads to additional tax revenue.
Rats.
So not only is what Republicans are attempting to do with immigration, calling this a border crisis and attempting to shut off anybody coming into the country, close the border. Not only is it impossible, it's stupid. I just thought I would point that out.
Okay. Yes. Well, as you know, they're not really after good results either.
Yeah,
that doesn't matter.
The other side of that coin, so everybody gets mad at Joe Biden because, he's not defending immigrants. He's not doing enough. He went along with this bill that didn't go anywhere, as it turns out. Mm-hmm. And question on the table this morning is he trying to do a sister soldier thing here? Is he the tough one on border control? He's the one that said, I'll close the border down if you pass this bill that you obviously aren't going to do, so I think I'll take credit for it.
Well, I guess. If you do pass it, I
and
guess
actually, there is a piece on that from John Storr this morning.
Okay.
Okay, and he writes, nearly all GOP senators killed an immigration reform bill Wednesday that they demanded from the Democrats. I don't know if I completely buy this. A lot of stuff that happens is like there's a parade and I'll jump out in front and pretend I'm leading it. But nearly all GOP senators killed an immigration reform bill Wednesday that they demanded from the Democrats. Missing from the discourse so far is they didn't mean what they said. But Biden knew they didn't mean what they said, and he called their bluff. Now he, not Trump, is the border hawk. And let me talk about this. Now, before I do, let me just say there's another thing going on here, which I find
SCOTUS.
incredibly frustrating.
Okay.
Biden hates performance. He's not really good at getting in front of a camera and, doing a 1 hour show based on nothing. He's not Seinfeld. He's certainly not Trump doing The Apprentice. He's not there to hog the camera. He generally does whatever he does behind the scenes and then comes out later and announces it.
Yeah, all right.
But he gets it done in his own way. It's actually been an incredibly productive presidential term when you look at the stuff that's passed in a bipartisan manner, given this Congress, which we see on display in the last few days. It's all the more remarkable that he was able to do this given this Congress.
True.
And so he does these things, but he's not performative. And so people get really mad. I don't know. He's too old. I don't like him. Okay. So then if Biden actually does try to do a little politics and say, okay, well, you didn't like it. Let me do this. I'll tell you what. I'm going to take credit for this stuff. It's political. It's not, administrative behind the scenes stuff. I'll go out in front of the camera and say, I'm taking credit for it. Oh, well, you're just making it up. I don't like when you do that. And it's like, well, what do you want him to do? What is your problem with him?
Well,
he's too old. Well, he can't do anything about that. What else? Well, there doesn't need to be anything else.
I guess
well,
not.
actually, yeah, there does.
What?
Because
what
you
will
have a
it be?
binary choice. You have somebody who's trying to shut off immigration and basically keep America white again. Mm-hmm. You have somebody who wants to get rid of abortion. You have somebody who wants to be a dictator. And then you have Biden, who you find some excuse for why you don't really like him as much as like you should. And you know what? Get over it.
Yeah, well, they won't.
Well, they did.
Oh, who did?
You know who else had
I don't know
big
what's going on
Democratic
here.
turnout in the primary? Nevada.
Oh.
Almost record. If everybody's
Well,
so
then they are.
bored
Well,
and
you
nobody
know.
cares
Well,
and
then what's
nobody's
the
really
problem?
interested in the Democrat, how come New Hampshire and Nevada actually did okay in terms of primary stuff? Okay, Iowa didn't, but Iowa's a caucus with like minus 30-degree wind chill. I don't think that's very representative. In fact, Iowa isn't representative anyway.
No. Nevada's having a caucus today.
Nevada's having a Republican caucus today, but even the non-binding Republican primary in Nevada,
Yes.
near caucus records.
Really? And they came out to vote for nobody.
Yeah. Democrat primary has surpassed 111,000 votes, according to data from the Secretary of State's office. That's 76% by mail, and that's one of the reasons why it's so high.
Oh, okay.
More than
I
14,000
thought,
in person, and nearly 13,000 votes cast in person on Election Day.
Pretty good, then. I was going to suggest if they were having trouble, they should shape their voting booths like slot machines.
But
That
that's
might
almost
help.
the record. The 2008 record for turnout, and there was a pretty contested Democratic primary in
That's
2008,
Yes.
was 118.
All
And they
right.
got 111,000.
That's pretty good.
That's
so
actually pretty good.
vote by mail works pretty well. And that's
Now-
an excellent for, particularly when there's no contest going
Right.
on.
And there was no contest on the Republican side
That is
because
true, too.
Nikki Haley's name was on the ballot, but she wasn't really working to do anything with it. Donald Trump's name wasn't on the ballot because he's going to be elected by caucus. And in the Republican, and none of the above won, but the turnout was 72,000,
Yeah.
almost at the GOP caucus record of 75,000 in 2016.
No.
So people are voting.
They must be enjoying
So,
it.
well, they're all going to stay home. They're not staying home. You know, one of the things that people look at the polls and say, well, the polls tell us that people aren't that interested and they're going to stay home. And then you go look at the actual results of the election. That's not what we're seeing.
Well,
let me write a whole article reconciling how the polls and how the elections are different. Well, okay, fine. There's your theory. Fact is, they are different.
Well, that at least is a good theory. And then, of course, by the way, if with voting by mail, if people tell you they're going to stay home, that doesn't mean they're not voting.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm going to stay home. I already sent my vote.
I'm staying home.
I mailed it.
Because I already voted.
Yeah. So I guess you have to take that into
put
account,
it in my mailbox
everybody.
And I'm waiting for the postman to pick it up.
Yeah. I'm staying home to make sure that it gets picked up.
Anyway, back to John Stohr. So late last month, the president said he would shut down the U.S.-Mexican border. I'm sorry, I had to get that rant in. It bothers me that people – I'll tell you another story.
All right.
Again, because I'm old.
Poor John Stohr is not going to get his article read.
Yeah, that's all right.
I can handle it.
Mine.
Okay.
He'll deal with it.
I'd rather hear you.
So there was a improv group that actually was very funny, very sarcastic, very intellectual. Years and years ago, called Firesign Theater.
All right.
Don't know if you're familiar with them, but they have wonderful work that they've done. Preserved on YouTube.
Yeah.
You can look up Nick Danger, Third Eye, which is a takeoff on detective stuff. But the one I'm thinking about is called We're All Bozos on This Bus.
Oh. Okay.
And the basic theme is that, people don't really spend that much time thinking about things or care that much. And there's a president who's not really a president. He's a hologram. This is back like in the 70s.
Oh.
He was a hologram. And the theme of this whole 1 hour sketch is a programmer decides he's going to reprogram the president.
It's not a bad idea.
And he upsets the bozos on the bus, who are all upset that he got into the programming stuff and shut the president down. And they start complaining to each other, man, that dude, he broke the president. He just screwed everything up. And I'm thinking, people want a hologram president. They don't want Biden to be like a normal person. They don't care if he eats ice cream. They don't care if he gets stuff done behind the scene. They want him to be a hologram and perform.
Well, they got used to that.
They're like frustrated that he's not that. He's never going to be that. I don't know that you're ever going to have that.
Well, Trump, I guess, was the nearest thing they had.
And now
they
he
can't quit him.
And so that's why everybody's unhappy. I don't want either one of them. Biden's old and Trump's boring. Let's get somebody else. Who do you want? I want that person. Okay, you can have that person. Do you see all the problems with that person? I don't want them. I want generic person.
Max Headroom.
I want a hologram. Max Headroom. Right, exactly. So, all that stuff that came before the virtual AI that we have now, it's actually, very, very interesting to go back and look at. So John Stohr says, when it comes to the negotiations over border policy and immigration reform, there's usually a formula. It's a swap, wrote Jonathan Weissman. The GOP gets border security and Democrats get a pathway to citizenship or legalization in some way or shape or form. This time, however, the Democrats changed course. They dropped their demand for legalization as they prepared to give away the store, quote unquote. The new bill became a border security only bill that sacrificed all leverage for legalization. That's why people were unhappy with it on the left.
Good reason.
Good reason. Then on January 26th, the president added more uncharacteristic behavior. He said he'd shut down the border if the Congress gave him the power to do it. Now, why did he say that? And John Stohr says, well, after last night, we know why.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to happen.
Yes. And again, the people who were upset with the direction that the bill were taking, it's true, it's right. You never want to be a pawn in all of this stuff. I hope it works out, and it's always a risk. What if it doesn't work out and this thing happens? Well, okay, right. That would be bad, and I'm sorry.
But again, whether it was planned or not. So John Stohr says the president snatched the border as a campaign issue out of Donald Trump's hands. He snatched it, and Trump doesn't seem to know it's been snatched. And in the end,
hands are small.
Biden is good at politics, and Trump isn't.
Yeah, okay.
And I started to laugh at that. you have all these people complaining Biden isn't doing enough politics. So he does politics, and now they're complaining because Biden is doing politics.
Yeah, how dare? Well, I don't understand what's happening anymore. That's too political.
That's the kernel of my rant. That's why it's like,
right.
what do you want?
I liked the ice cream part.
Me too.
Frankly, I would like to go back.
As long as it's flavors I like, I'm down with that.
Yes. Well, yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, he doesn't do enough politics. And
when you do, you kill him.
Yeah. Well, at least in this example.
That's what I mean about this. This is just the soldier moment. Let him run with it. See what happens.
Yeah, so long as the thing doesn't happen. And,
it's not happening.
Yeah. So,
they voted it down.
I know. But
now is the time for him to do this.
It'll make you sweat when you get used like a pawn like that. Why are they offering up my life? I know, but they're not going to take the deal. I know, but sometimes they do crazy things. Are you sure? Well, there it is. It just happened. All right, I know, but I didn't like it. This was a very uncomfortable experience for me. Okay, that's true. I understand that.
Yeah, all of that, And I'm not saying he's a genius and it's a good thing he did this and it was a good thing. I'm saying,
in the end,
sometimes you got to make lemonade out of lemon. Yeah. And when you do,
all right.
Just understand what's going on here.
I guess
now
so.
He's going to be even more harsh about it because it doesn't matter.
Okay. I guess. Boy, I hope that continues. Then
he's going to run against the Republicans who can't get anything done. And he's going to say, don't tell me that I'm soft on this or that. You can't even get somebody impeached.
Well, yeah.
You can't even get a messaging bill through.
That's true. That is rather disgraceful.
You can't even pass a rule.
Yes, most people probably won't.
You can't even count a vote count on the floor. You can't do anything. Don't give me that you would do. You can't do anything. You're terrible. I at least did this, and this. He called their bluff, says John Storr. That's what happened. They said the border was in crisis, but it doesn't matter because you don't have to fix it till next year. They said migrants were invading. Some of them even agreed with Donald Trump when he said migrants are poisoning the blood. They didn't mean it. They didn't mean any of it. Biden proved they didn't mean it. He and Democrats dropped the usual demands for citizenship, and they moved to the right. They knew Trump wouldn't permit his party to take away an issue so important to his campaign that it could hardly be called a campaign without it.
That's true, too.
Because it's so central to the campaign. As Bloomberg's Jonathan Tamari wrote last night, not long ago, if you had Mitch McConnell, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce all endorsing a deal negotiated by a conservative Oklahoma senator, and I would add, and the Border Patrol Union, it'd be a slam dunk with GOP senators. Those folks aren't running the show anymore.
Yeah.
But
all right.
Trump isn't running the show either. Yesterday, while Biden gave remarks at the White House on stalled Senate talks, CNN's Manu Raju said Biden pointedly blames Donald Trump for the expected defeat of the bipartisan border bill. Mike Madrid on Twitter was having a cow. Said, this isn't how you do it. You blame the GOP. You don't blame Donald Trump. No, actually, you blame Donald Trump.
I mean, now it's the same thing anyway.
Yeah, he blames Trump for wanting to make this a campaign issue and says he'd rather weaponize the border than solve it. He calls on the GOP to show some spine and stand up to Trump. Punchbowl News' Max Cohen said the president said if the border bill fails, and it did, he'll remind American voters every day until the election that the reason the border isn't secure is because of Trump. Yeah. All of a sudden, Biden's the border hawk. As long as the Republicans refuse to walk the walk, that's not going to change. Trump is left-looking like he wants to complain more than he wants to act. And all of this makes the push by House Republicans to impeach the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, seem especially weak. GOP Senator Kevin Kramer said as much. What's rich to me is the Speaker says the bill in the Senate is dead on arrival. Then they proceed impeaching a cabinet secretary, which is obviously dead on arrival.
Yes, that's true. That doesn't
so Biden now played him. He'll continue to because in the end, Trump isn't that good at politics. The end.
Okay. I can buy that.
So just an interesting perspective. But, to me, it reminds me of, when you've decided you don't like Biden, that everything he does is bad. And even if he does the stuff you want him to do, you're unhappy because he's doing the stuff you want him to. Because you told him to do it. Now that he's doing it, you go, well, why is he doing that? He's making me nervous about all these other things.
That's funny because that sounds like exactly what happened with Republicans.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. You're following the same tack as they are?
Sometimes
There's no difference between the parties.
Sometimes voters have to step back and just, let the stuff play out and understand what the underlying issues are. The underlying issues are that Republicans don't want any immigrants here. They're they're poisoning the blood stuff right out of the Nazi playbook.
Yeah.
And that's the issue on the table. And if you have to decide between Biden, who's not doing that, no matter what you say about what he said, did, or supported or didn't support, and what the Republicans clearly mean, because they tried it when they were there. They were perfectly happy putting as many asylum seekers in inhumane conditions as they possibly could until the court said they couldn't anymore.
Yeah.
That's your choice. And so you have to make that choice knowing that those are the two candidates you have. Or as Don Rumsfeld might have said, you go with the candidates you have, not the candidates you wish you had.
That's right. And some of the candidates you think you wish you had are dropping out anyway. So what can I tell you? Not much opportunity. All right. What a week. So, yeah, and it's about, a minute or two until the Supreme Court, I guess, begins their session, although I do notice this. I was wondering about this. Adam Bonin fills us in. Wait till you find out, as everybody tunes in for the arguments, that the first 20, 25 minutes is them shuffling papers and telling you about other decisions that they've reached in other cases you didn't know about or care about. So you might be able to make it almost all the way to the end of the show before you have to tune in and hear actual arguments. That's good news. And, that's cool by me, because I wish I was keeping one ear, I guess not eye, but ear on it. But apparently nothing will be happening for the bulk of the rest of the show. So that's good news. And nothing better happen tomorrow, damn it, because we won't hear from you until Monday. So hopefully a quiet weekend, although not quiet enough that there's nothing for you to say when you get back here on Monday.
Yeah, we shall see.
It'll never be quiet. Okay.
Anyway,
very good.
So
Wonderful.
today's summary is that Republicans really, really, really screwed up to the point where they've actually pissed the press off. So now they're not getting good press.
Okay. That is good news and a good follow-up to trying to murder them 4 years ago. It reminds them of just how bad this gang is.
Yeah, and then they go, oh, yeah, that happened.
Right. Well, that was peaking too soon.
I'll talk to you on Monday. As you suggested, maybe we should.
Okay. Let's try that.
We'll defeat the previous question and start all over again.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I mentioned on the way out the door, it is 10 o'clock. If you were thinking of switching over to the Supreme Court live stream to listen to the very exciting arguments over the 14th Amendment's Section 3 disqualification clause, don't go yet, because as I said, Adam Bonin, who follows these things fairly closely, says in his, and by the way, some big debate over what to call posts on Blue Sky. Apparently, skeet very widely derided as a term. I agree. People were debating over different names to give them. Somebody just said, let's just call them posts and be done with it. Although, I don't know, I actually am for just calling them tweets as though they were on Twitter and then making Twitter owner Elon Musk probably very mad about that. You can't call them tweets. We call ours tweets. Oh, yeah? Well, watch this. They're tweets. Well, that means they happened on Twitter. No longer it doesn't. I think we can erode the brand if you just continue to call it that. Or, and he'll probably look at it as saying, no, you're strengthening the brand by reminding everybody that Twitter exists. Maybe. I don't know. We'll have to figure this out. Anyway, Adam Bonin posts, says, what have you. It's going to be hysterical when the court opens session today, happening now, by announcing opinions in earlier cases, and folks are going to be frustrated by hearing 20 to 25 minutes from the justices on shifting burdens in whistleblower cases under Sarbanes-Oxley and the choice of law provisions under admiralty law. I guess those are some of the previous cases now pending. He uses a cool guy's abbreviation for Sarbanes-Oxley, Sarba-Ox. The fun thing, of course, about choice of law provisions under admiralty law, or anything for that matter under admiralty law, is that it is all spoken in pirate lingo with yars and shiver me timbers and stuff like that. And that's what makes admiralty law a cool thing to practice. This is a fact. Don't look it up. You don't need to. look away from Wikipedia or anything that might tell you that that is not true, and imagine that it was instead. And that's how we get a new generation of admiralty law practitioners on the hook. Okay, so yeah, you won't be missing anything if for the next half hour or so you stick with us on the show here, and then maybe a little bit later, then some preliminary crap. Quite honestly, you could probably hang on with us until 11 o'clock and then switch over and not have missed anything. And by this point, of course, having heard all the reports about the Amici briefs and the very dumb claims being made by the Trump side, you probably aren't going to hear anything that you haven't already heard, quite honestly. So what the hell? Stick with us. Now, if you want to talk about how bad the people are who are going to be involved in some of these things, well, you couldn't do much better than asking Amanda Marcotte about that, or about anything for that matter. Interesting angle on the story of the day under this headline. Of course, Trump's Supreme Court lawyer is the same guy behind Texas's sadistic abortion ban. Like, who else did you think he was going to hire for this? This pitched via social media with the on the angle of Trump's latest lawyer is the worst one yet. It's Jonathan Mitchell is his name, and for Jonathan Mitchell, the subheader of this Salon story says, "Gutting democracy is the means, but controlling women is the motive." And so, sure, I'd like to hear how we get around to controlling women in this 14th Amendment case. And maybe it's not directly in this case, but the guy makes a career of it, and he's the one that's going to be arguing, by the way, to hell with democracy. The big news that kicked off this week was that the Supreme Court set Thursday to hear oral arguments over whether or not Donald Trump should be kicked off the ballot per the 14th Amendment, which of course bars those who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the government from holding office. What got a lot less attention was the announcement of which lawyer would argue on Trump's behalf. Former Texas Solicitor General Jonathan Mitchell, that's what his background is like. Reproductive rights activists sure sat up and took notice of the mention of Mitchell. He's one of the most odious men in the entire anti-abortion world, which is quite an achievement, considering the misogyny that fuels that movement. Mitchell's earned this worst of the worst title by being the architect behind the Texas bounty hunter law. I think we all remember that one, which adds a level of creative sadism to abortion bans that would make the villain in the Saw movies envious. There have been so many vicious abortion bans passed since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022 that readers could be forgiven for forgetting how ugly the Texas law actually is. To recap, beyond just banning abortion, the Mitchell-penned law offers a $10,000 bounty to any person who sues someone who aids and abets an abortion. It empowers every two-bit bully imaginable to stick their noses into other people's business. A nosy Karen who thinks her neighbor's daughter is a slut, she can sue that neighbor for taking her daughter to the abortion appointment. An angry incel can punish a more romantically successful classmate by suing him for paying for a girlfriend's abortion. Local church busybodies who find out a community member donated to an abortion fund can now sue for aiding and abetting. And as most feminists immediately predicted, abusive husbands and boyfriends can sue the friends of their victim for helping with an abortion that helped a victim escape her destructive relationship. Now, one of Mitchell's first big cases under that law looks exactly like what feminists predicted. Marcus Silva did not want his ex-wife to leave him. Witnesses and text messages paint a vivid picture of the cruelty he repeatedly inflicted on her that made her flee, however. He reportedly got drunk at her work party and called her a slut and a whore in front of all of her colleagues. Nice guy. He allegedly monitored her phone against her will and would follow her around the house screaming invective. Great relationship. He reportedly threatened to release sexually explicit photos of her if she didn't return to do his laundry. According to court documents, Silva told his ex-wife to have sex with him, or, quote, you're just gonna have your effing life destroyed in every effing way that you can imagine to where you want to blow your effing brains out. And that's a quote. In order to escape, Silva's ex-wife aborted a pregnancy. According to her and two friends, Silva found out about the abortion beforehand but did not say anything to stop her. Instead, they allege he waited until she had the abortion and then, to punish her for leaving him, sued her friends under the Mitchell-penned law. That's who will be doing the arguments in front of the court today. In case you're thinking, well, I wonder if this guy has his head screwed on right or not. He then told his ex-wife, according to the countersuit, that he would stop legally harassing her friends if she returned to him. It's not Silva doing the arguments, although it might as well be. It's Mitchell, who enabled Silva's craziness, who will be doing the argument today. Let's see. Mitchell didn't just write the law that Silva is allegedly using to blackmail his ex-wife. He's also representing Silva in a lawsuit to bankrupt two women whose only sin was helping a friend leave a toxic marriage. Makes you root for pushing a guy into a wood chipper. Whatever. Along with his lawyer. Terrorizing women who leave bad marriages may be Mitchell's passion, but far from his only far-right interest. As Lisa Needham at Balls and Strikes wrote in April, Mitchell's caseload reads like a list of grievances read aloud at CPAC. He has sued to destroy Obamacare and called on the Supreme Court to end, quote, rights to homosexual behavior and same-sex marriage, unquote. He has lamented court decisions legalizing abortion and contraception on the grounds that they assumed, quote, the right to freely engage in sexual intercourse, unquote. Can't have that right. And no shock, Mitchell is big on book banning, representing Llano County, Texas, in a court battle over the public library removing books that feature LGBTQ characters. And Texans can tell me whether you guys say Llano County, despite the fact that it's obviously a double L, and that in Spanish you would say Llano, but in Texan, who knows? What links these various issues together besides irrational hate is obvious. These stances are all wildly unpopular with a majority of Americans. People like having health care, free speech, and the right to a private sex life. Mitchell no doubt understands that if he put any of his preferred policies up for a vote, his views would lose big time. There's lots of talk in the media correctly about how Trump and the MAGA movement are a threat to democracy. But why the GOP has turned fascist is often lost in the discourse. Mitchell's presence on this case before the Supreme Court shows why. They know they cannot win with free and fair elections, so they are focused on destroying democracy itself. Make no mistake, we like to try not to. The argument for keeping a fascist insurrectionist on the ballot is deeply anti-democratic. Democracy is not simply voting, it includes limits on how and under what circumstances political power can be disputed and wielded so that democracy itself can survive from generation to generation. Adam Serwer of The Atlantic recently explained, there is no rule that says democracies must give endless and unlimited grace to those who use the public trust to conspire, for all the world to see, against them. Jamel Bouie of the New York Times wrote in a similar column, and he's back with even more today. The response of the legal world to the briefs submitted by Mitchell and the rest of Trump's team can be summed up as such. Are you kidding? The case for keeping Trump on the ballot is admittedly weak, but even so, it's astonishing how bad and lazy Mitchell's arguments are, including a claim that the Constitution only prevents insurrectionists from holding office, not for running for it. The words being tossed around on law Twitter are bizarre and a sign of weakness and a massive tactical blunder. And pronunciation blunder for that matter. But there's a likely reason Mitchell, who once clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia, who's dead now. Oh my God, maybe Mitchell did it. I don't know. Barely bothers to argue his case. He doesn't care about the law and is betting the majority of the Supreme Court doesn't either. Many observers believe, for good reason, that what will determine this case is not the merits, but the fact that the majority of Federalist Society-linked members are too corrupt and partisan to make the correct call. Why put forward the effort towards making a good argument when standing on your head and yelling MAGA forever would get the same result? Especially since there really aren't any good arguments for keeping Trump on the ballot. Of course, this just underscores how much the GOP has become a fascist party. Facts don't matter. Law doesn't matter. Democracy doesn't matter. Basic public safety doesn't even matter. The only thing that matters is power. Arguably, it's a fascist flex to scorch the Constitution in favor of an incoherent criminal who smells like a butt. Oh my. Okay. Nice to bring that back up. It proves Republican power, at least at the Supreme Court, is totally disconnected from even basic common sense and decency. Now, we could still see them make the right decision at some point. That wouldn't be terrible. But it's unlikely that Mitchell is taking this case just because he wants a piece of Trump's campaign cash, because he's not going to get paid. He will want far-right policy wins in return. His involvement gives lie to the media nonsense about how Trump is moderating on the issue of abortion. Why are they even saying that? On the contrary, it looks like the radical anti-choice movement is offering Trump help, and they will expect him to pay them back. That will almost certainly come in the form of a national abortion ban. Yes, it will be unpopular, but neither Trump nor Mitchell will care because the end game is putting Trump's power entirely out of the reach of voters. That may be, or at a minimum, he'll say, well, I can only serve, if he decides to abide by the Constitution, I can only serve this one term anyway. I'm never running for anything ever again. So what the hell? National abortion ban is the payback you want. You got it. There's no political cost to me. Something to keep in mind, I guess. Anyway, all right. A couple of other stories that might be worth discussing today. Let's see. For instance, something I mentioned yesterday and a widely circulated USA Today article with an eye-catching headline. Goofy God's Army convoy on Texas border shows Trump's MAGA movement is just one long con. True, but to what end? I don't know. But we all realize it. The subheader on this piece, convoy riders came in underwhelming numbers and accomplished little beyond showing everyone how tragically gullible they are. That's MAGA in a nutshell, loud and, in the end, impotent, says Rex Hupke of USA Today. And the rest of it he says this way. It's time for non-brainwashed Americans and the media at large to accept something. Former President Donald Trump's MAGA movement is a tissue paper tiger. Oh my. This was on vivid display in Texas over the weekend. A much ballyhooed convoy, caravan really, of MAGA patriots descended on a town near the southern border, ostensibly ready to protect America from what right-wing politicians like Governor Greg Abbott cynically, dangerously, and falsely call an invasion. Boy, froggy this morning. Okay, the God's Army convoy was supposed to be a mighty force. Remember when they were claiming this? That they were going to have 700,000 or more people from every corner of America. And as I recall, they were thinking 700,000 vehicles were going to join their caravan. Presumably at least some of them with multiple occupants, but no chance in hell for that. Not even close. Not even, I don't think there was even 1,000 in the end. Never mind 700,000. It wound up being maybe a couple hundred vehicles parked at a rural ranch in Quemado, Texas. Basically a Trump rally without a Trump, but with plenty of hucksters selling MAGA merch and grifting the easily grifted. Next section here. MAGA was promised a Texas border invasion, but it wasn't there. Some actually, in addition to just parking in this big, stupid parking lot, visited the border in nearby Eagle Pass, Texas, and were surprised to not witness the invasion that they had been promised. Convoy goer Misty Gregory told MSNBC, "It's not what I expected. But then again, I don't know what I expected." Well, that's probably true. You don't know anything. "I can tell you it's not as bad as what I thought. So that's kind of eye-opening in itself." And as somebody suggested on social media the other day, they should all go up and take a look at Minneapolis and see that it hasn't been burned to the ground by Antifa, as was previously claimed. Minneapolis, Portland, Oregon, all the various places that they were told were burned to the ground. Probably didn't happen. And I know it didn't because those cities still exist. Abbott and about a dozen other pro-razor wire GOP governors were in Eagle Pass on Sunday, hollering and whatnot. Some residents said the recent invasion of Trump supporters from the convoy had been downright scary. I can buy that. "We are constantly being told that we're being invaded, and that never felt true until today, when the convoy came to town in anticipation of the governor's event," Jesse F. Fuentes told WOAI NBC News Channel 4. It's a long title for what TV channel that was on. It's getting to be like endowed chairs at universities. Anyway, this is political theater by outsiders. Ooh, outside agitators. How do you like that? The reality is that it has brought dangerous, violent groups into our beautiful, peaceful city. Eagle Pass is safer than most cities in America. If you look at crime statistics, this is just a fact. We don't appreciate these staged events that dramatically misrepresent our reality on the border and that invite extremist groups that pose a real danger to people in our community. You know, and the danger of gun fail is dramatically increased whenever you call a MAGA group to town. In Texas, the MAGA movement again reveals its impotence, is the next section. So God's army's foot soldiers came in underwhelming numbers and accomplished little beyond showing everyone how tragically gullible they are and making the locals twitchy. That's MAGA in a nutshell. Loud, threatening, and in the end, impotent, just as the subheader said. Trump won the presidency in 2016, and he hasn't won a thing since. And he didn't even really win that. He's the face of this supposedly forceful political movement, but the movement mirrors its creator, a loudmouth con artist who overpromises and rarely delivers a thing, and also, as it turns out, smells real bad. The wall? Mexico will pay for the wall? The border crisis fixed? Nope, nope, and nope. Most recently exemplified in their rejection of their own bill in Congress, of course. The God's Army convoy, like all things MAGA, was a grift. MAGA is and always has been a con to line the pockets of Trump and others who saw a swath of Americans waiting to be fleeced. The fact that our border is not now lined with big, strong, gun-toting patriots willing to defend America at all costs is not surprising. MAGA says, "We are coming by the hundreds of thousands." Then MAGA delivers a crowd that resembles a small county fair on a slow day, populated by a mix of conspiracy theorists, angry xenophobes, and slightly befuddled hangers-on who didn't get what they were promised. The bipartisan border bill shows an actual attempt to address the crisis, of course, but we know what happened to this. On Sunday in Washington, D.C., a bipartisan Senate bill to address the border crisis, which isn't a crisis, and they should stop saying so, was released. It's a serious piece of legislation that includes about $20 billion in border funds. It deserves strong consideration. I'm glad it didn't get it, though. But the Trump loyalists in the House have already declared it dead on arrival. After the Senate bill was released, President Joe Biden said, "The United States Senate has done the hard work it takes to reach a bipartisan agreement," although it really didn't, because they aren't going to have it. Now, House Republicans have to decide, do they want to solve the problem or do they want to keep playing politics with the border? Well, we know the answer to that. Anyway, they'll definitely want to keep playing politics with the border because that's what Trump, the MAGA king, has told them to do. People treat MAGA like an unstoppable force, but it's not. But they are being cowed by a weenie movement that's all smoke and mirrors. They are There are loud influencers who puff up the strength of MAGA, and there are, sadly, many in the political press who buy in and amplify that belief, which you've played no small part in by saying that there's a border crisis. But okay. But MAGA, at least since Trump first took office, has been a losing movement. It's not unstoppable. It's not a 700,000 person convoy of devoted citizen soldiers descending on Texas in a show of force. It's a comically disorganized and useless parade of con artists and the conned, drifting from one apocalyptic grievance to the next. The border is a serious issue, but God's army and Trump and his slavish enablers in the House are not serious people. MAGA, for all its bluster, is a joke without a punchline, so I guess the timing doesn't matter so much. The sooner people recognize that, the better. I guess so. I'll agree with that. You could do your part in stopping with the nonsense of referring to issues surrounding the border as a crisis of any kind, except insofar as a humanitarian crisis is involved. That's certainly true. Anyway, let's see. Other things to bring you up to date on. There are many. And speaking of Republican unseriousness on the subject, I thought I would share this Steve Bannon article with you because he's done the work of listing things that needed to be listed. We were referring to this, and I know when we were speaking with Joan, we were talking about how frequently Republicans have done this before. That is to say, participated in negotiations on an immigration bill and then turned around and killed their own immigration bill. If it sounds familiar to you, it should. You have within your living memory as a politically aware adult, no matter how old you are, at least one of these instances besides this one. And if you're old enough, there are several. And here he goes listing them. Why the GOP has spent 2 decades killing immigration compromises. For the 4th time in 20 years, the GOP has rejected a compromise on immigration and border policies. It's worth understanding why this keeps happening, says the subheader. Speaking of which, by the way, that reminded me of something else, the thought that occurred to me this morning, and I might as well spit it out now since the things are probably starting to get underway in the Supreme Court hearing. I was just wondering, since Bannon has done the job of counting how many times this has happened with immigration, I was wondering if there's a count of how many times, like I was thinking a good way to open proceedings from one of the liberal justices today would be to say, interesting. So here is Citizen Trump here today making arguments about the 14th Amendment, and we're having to take this case on an expedited basis. But isn't this like the 915th time that Trump or the Trump administration or Trump personally, Citizen Trump, President Trump, what have you, has been in front of this court on an emergency basis asking for some ruling? It has to be done on an expedited basis because there's some crisis being precipitated. And that's what's so interesting about this. Like, well, we should let the voters decide and yada, yada, and democracy and stability. Like, there'll be an argument made today that allowing Trump to run and to remain on the ballot and to reject this idea of 14th Amendment disqualification is to strike a blow for stability in our political process and not to do anything radical or strange that hasn't been done before, but was always threatened. I mean, look, just, there's been no insurrection since the Civil War, and there's been no need to invoke this, but that's because most people are well behaved. This guy is not, and so what are you going to do? The law leads you there on its face. But you might suggest at some point, speaking of chaos agents, this is, probably the 20th time that Trump, in one of his various incarnations, has appeared before this court on an emergency basis. I'm tired of cleaning up after Donald Trump on an emergency basis so often. This is insulting to the court. We have real business to take care of. We can't keep bailing this idiot out of constitutional crises over and over again. In the name of political stability, I declare that you are, in fact, disqualified. You think it's disruptive to do that, but I think it's incredibly stabilizing because no other president is going to be in front of us this often demanding that we bail him out of so many constitutional crises. In the name of ending this perpetual constitutional crisis, I think we should end your candidacy. Just a little bit of self-care that I might suggest to the justices of the Supreme Court. Anyway, when we come back, we'll run through the full list that Steve Bannon has compiled for us of how often Republicans have pulled the exact same play on the immigration bill over and over and over again, and then we'll put some dates to it, and then you'll be well prepared for weekend conversation about the subject. We'll be right back after a 2-minute break. Go listen to the court. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's jump straight back to Steve Bannon, who was going to give us a rundown of the number and frequency with which number of times that the Republicans have proposed a supposed immigration compromise only to come back and abandon their own compromise and prevent it from happening. This is the fourth time in 20 years that this has happened. The senators who spent 4 months negotiating a bipartisan compromise. Oh, and by the way, this should also be reminiscent of anyone who lived through the negotiations for what became eventually the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, and how long Democrats in the Senate at that point spent negotiating with Republicans who were supposedly negotiating in good faith, trying to reach a compromise. After all, Obamacare may or may not have been modeled on Romney Care, and that was a Republican initiative, and the Heritage Foundation at one point had suggested something similar, and everybody was trying to make Republicans feel better about this version of health care, or rather health coverage accessibility, I guess, law. And shouldn't you be willing to accept it? And we were always just that close to finding somebody, a Republican partner to go forward with. And then in the end, they all said no, just like immigration. So the senators who spent 4 months negotiating this bipartisan compromise on border policy and security aid probably didn't see the political freight train coming. No, maybe they did. Senator James Langford Republican of Oklahoma, who took the lead in the talks on behalf of his party, he thinks. Turns out his party did not think so. Predicted last month that the bill could garner up to 70 votes. Well, I guess that'll be wrong. Up to 70 votes in the chamber, but within hours of unveiling the legislation, it was obvious that the far-right opposition was simply too great, as was the opposition among people who were positioning themselves as moderates during the entirety of the negotiations. On Monday, the day after the bill text reached the public, GOP officials lined up to condemn the package in no uncertain terms. By most measures, the odds that the legislation would fail were roughly 99%. A day later, they reached 100%. NBC News reported Republican senators made it clear Tuesday that they will kill the border security bill their party negotiated with Democrats, a stunning turnaround less than 48 hours after it was released by Senator James Lankford and blessed by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. McConnell, overruled by his Senate GOP members, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and former President Donald Trump, conceded it has no path to passage. Around the same time, Senator Chris Murphy, who took the Democratic lead in negotiating the compromise, was asked if there was still any hope for the bill. No, the senator replied. To be sure, there will probably still be a procedural vote on the legislation, which would require 60 votes to advance, and you all know why. Literally no one involved in the process believes it will get anywhere close to that total. On the contrary, it will struggle to get close to 50 votes. We'll learn soon after what policymakers intend to do next, but as the dust settles on this dramatic failure, the problem is not just that Republicans have killed the bipartisan compromise they said they wanted. Making matters worse is the fact that Republicans have killed a bipartisan compromise that they said they wanted again. What are the examples? Well, how about going far enough back in order to have a Democratic Kennedy involved? McCain-Kennedy. After the 2004 elections, a bipartisan pair of longtime senators, Republican John McCain and Democrat Ted Kennedy, began work on a bipartisan immigration compromise. A version of their bill passed the Senate with strong Democratic support in 2006 before being rejected by House Republicans. Then the one I think a lot of us remember, the Gang of Eight. Everyone remembers it because it was a gang. Gangs are important. They get stuff done. Gang of Eight. After the 2012 elections, an octet of senators, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, began work on another bipartisan immigration compromise. A version of their bill passed the Senate with strong Democratic support in 2013 before being rejected by House Republicans. Oh, that feels like we need a sad trombone for each of those instances. Then, of course, in the Trump era, in 2018 and 19, a variety of bipartisan compromises on immigration policy took shape on Capitol Hill, including one crafted by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, who's always just so close to coming to compromise. Anyway, the measures received strong Democratic support before being rejected by Donald Trump and his White House team. So in case you were wondering, on what basis were they prepared to roll the dice that Republicans would in fact walk away from this extremely harsh border bill if Democrats actually said, no, we'll actually accept it? How could they be so sure that Republicans were going to reject it? And the answer, I guess, is they've done it 3 times before. And then now, of course, Lankford, Murphy, Sinema is part of a radical hostage strategy. Republicans told Democrats to embrace a bipartisan compromise on immigration and border policy, or the GOP would make it easier for Russia to take part of Eastern Europe by force. The resulting deal received strong Democratic support. Wow, that's crazy. Before being rejected by Republicans, except this time in both chambers. This last one is easily the most ridiculous, says Steve Bannon. The first 3 of these 4 efforts had something important in common. Democrats agreed to tougher border security, while Republicans agreed to provide a pathway to citizenship for immigrant families already in the United States, and none of them worked. But in this year's efforts, Democrats abandoned their own priority, giving the GOP effectively all of what it wanted in exchange for no real concessions, and Republicans killed it anyway. It's long been tempting to explain the GOP's opposition by pointing to the party's contempt for concessions. Republicans likely rejected the other compromise offers, the theory goes, because they were only prepared to accept what they wanted and nothing else. A pathway to citizenship was so offensive to so many GOP members, it necessarily doomed the initiatives. But this year altered the landscape in dramatic ways. Republicans didn't have to go along with a pathway to citizenship or anything the party could credibly characterize as amnesty. All they had to do was say yes when Democrats agreed to meet their demands. The fact that Republicans balked anyway leaves us with an uncomfortable but increasingly unavoidable conclusion. GOP officials keep killing meaningful solutions because they don't want to solve the problem. Instead, they want to keep exploiting the problem for electoral gain. The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, which tends to be closely aligned with GOP politics, asked this week, do Republicans want to better secure the U.S. border, or do they want to keep what has become an open sore festering, it isn't, for another year as an election issue? Does anyone seriously doubt the obvious answer to that question? No. And, of course, if you point out to them that, well, it actually isn't an open sore that's festering anyway, well, one, that might be reason not to want to do anything about it. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe we're even conceding too much by saying, yeah, it's a huge problem and they refuse to solve it. Well, it's also not really a huge problem. And they also refuse to solve it. And they want to pretend it's a huge problem. In addition, and I guess we were conditioned to come to believe that too. For many years, though, we also thought that they didn't want to, quote unquote, solve the problem of abortion by overturning Roe v. Wade. They would rather just yell about the issue. And then, it has to be pointed out, in the end, well, they did it and they accepted it. But they have seen what an electoral disaster it's been for them to have done that. They were right not to want to catch the car. And so maybe that's driving part of it too. Whether it's we just want to perpetuate the crisis. Well, I mean, that would be a pretty good explanation if you believe that there was a crisis. But maybe a better explanation is, well, we succeeded eventually with abortion and it killed us electorally. So maybe it's best not to succeed on the border either. That's a possibility. All right. Let's see. Some other things that it's time to share with you here. We didn't comment on this yesterday and I didn't put aside a story on it either. So I'll just have to go and look for something about it in the news. But yesterday, there was a very strange story circulating that was happening live on TV. Who's most likely? I don't know. We'll try the New York Times for their description of what happened. On live TV, Guardian Angels, that's essentially a vigilante street patrol in New York City that dates back, I think, to the, 80s, maybe to the late 70s. I can't remember. But the Guardian Angels, essentially New York's version of a militia, I guess, is what you could call it. But it just doesn't, it's not quite as lunatic and open carry type militia as you might find elsewhere. This is a New York City operation, after all. But just as militant anyway, and as lawless in its approach to things. Live TV, Guardian Angels tackle a man that their leader, Curtis Sliwa, misidentified as a migrant. Now, it shouldn't matter how he identified him, but it's also interesting that he misidentified him. The subheader reads this way, with a quote from Sliwa that he gave during this TV interview he was giving to none other than Sean Hannity. We've got to take back 42nd Street, Curtis Sliwa, founder of the anti-crime group, said on Hannity as the Guardian Angels committed a crime, essentially. Pushed a man to the ground, and they, of course, hyped it as knocking the crap out of the guy, but actually the video doesn't show much more than them roughing him up a little bit, but of course, enough that they should all have been arrested for assault and battery, but instead it was the guy who got pushed around who ended up getting the citation. Ed Shanahan summarizes the situation here for the New York Times. The Guardian Angels founder, Curtis Sliwa, was being interviewed live from Times Square on Tuesday night by the Fox News host Sean Hannity when their exchange took a startling turn. It actually took a startling turn even before then, with courteously screaming about, we got to take back 42nd Street and clean up the crime in Times Square. Times Square and 42nd Street are so different today from the connotation they carried when I was a kid, when the Guardian Angels were just getting their start, by the way. It really did used to be a very seedy area, and now it's like a glamorous tourist spot. I don't know what he's talking about. It's not necessarily a great place to be culturally speaking, but the seedy, crime-ridden underbelly of the city, it is not. Anyway, the topic was what both men seemed to agree was a migrant-fueled wave of crime and chaos that they claimed had overtaken New York amid a surge of arrivals into the city from the southern border over the past 2 years. And you can actually probably thank Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis directly for that. Suddenly, Mr. Sliwa had a prime-time example. Isn't that convenient? As he spoke, the half-dozen red-jacketed angels flanking him slipped out of frame. Our guys have just taken down one of the migrant guys right here on the corner of 42nd and 7th, where all this is taking place, Mr. Sliwa said, pointing off camera. Can you pan the camera? Mr. Hannity asked his cameraman. The cameraman swung around and captured the angels confronting a slightly built man in a hooded sweatshirt, throwing him to the ground and putting him in a headlock. He's out of control, Mr. Sliwa said as the camera turned away. He is, of course, if he were out of control, it would be odd given that there were 6 or 7 guardian angels piled on top of him and putting him in a headlock. I guess that just means that guardian angels are pretty lame and can't control people, which would be fine with me, except, unfortunately, they can, and they often do. He's out of control. They're out of control. But he says he's out of control, and the camera turns away, and Hannity shifts, of course, to criticizing President Biden over his administration's border policies. On Wednesday, however, the police said that the man was not a migrant, but a resident of the Bronx. Also very interesting. They left out of this, at least at this point, is Sliwa also, during the interview, goes on to say, not only is a migrant, but the reason that we're tackling him is he's just been accused of shoplifting. So that's the crime that we were talking about, the rampant crime being caused by migrants. And as it turns out, 1, he wasn't a migrant, and 2, no one had accused him of shoplifting. It's not like a nearby shop owner had come running on the street, help, stop that man, stop, thief. It was nothing like that. And, of course, you're on Hannity, so Hannity just says, oh, Slee was telling the truth. Let's just roll with it. But as it turns out on Wednesday, it turns out that the cops say he's not a migrant. He's a resident of the Bronx. They also said he had been issued a summons. Ooh, so he was a criminal, right? No, he was issued a summons for disorderly conduct after trying to disrupt the interview and for being, quote, loud, disorderly, and threatening on a crowded sidewalk, which never happens in New York City. He was not charged with shoplifting, as Mr. Sliwa had suggested on the air that he would be. What ended up happening here was there was a heckler. Sliwa was giving an interview to Sean Hannity. Being an idiot, as he usually is, he was instantly recognizable in his stupid red beret with his guardian angels around him in their 1970s satin, wannabe Studio 54 jackets that would actually mean that you would never be admitted to the place. You were just ridiculous looking. And somebody said, hey, those guys are a bunch of idiots and they suck. And they said, oh, yeah, well, we're going to stomp on you. And now we're going to say that it's okay that we're doing it because you're a migrant and you've just been accused of shoplifting, none of which was actually true. They just wanted to beat up a heckler. The episode came in the wake of 2 high-profile criminal cases that have provided fodder for those critical of the migrants' effect on the city, the arrests of about a half a dozen people in a robbery spree, and an attack on 2 police officers in a Times Square brawl. Now, who would want to attack police officers given that they showed up to this situation and gave the guy who got beat up a summons? Anyway, Although Mayor Eric Adams and other administration officials have been clear in saying that the vast majority of migrants coming to New York are following the law, the mayor has also said repeatedly that the influx will, quote, destroy the city. And the police commissioner, Edward Caban? I don't know the police commissioner in New York anymore, said in announcing the robbery arrests that a wave of migrant crime has washed over our city. Well, anyway, I think at this point we can probably jump out of this description, although it'll give us a little bit more background a little later on. But worth noting in all of this is that Sliwa was he the Republican nominee for mayor who ran against Adams? And so interesting that Adams, of course, is rushing to collude with him on this idea that immigrant crime wave is destroying New York. Oh, anyway, let's see. Murad Awawada, maybe? Oh, a little difficult to pronounce last name at first blush. But he is executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. And he said on Wednesday that the rhetoric being used by the mayor and others, like his previous opponent, had emboldened a vigilante like Mr. Sliwa to take the law into his own hands in ways that threatened all New Yorkers, especially as they had just beaten up somebody who, they just didn't like and got away with it too and got the cops to give him a summons. This is what happens when Eric Adams and the Republicans go to extreme lengths to scapegoat immigrants for every problem they've been unable to solve, says our executive director here. It needs to stop. Now, a spokesman for Adams declined to comment on the episode involving Sliwa and said that New York City had provided shelter and care for more than 175,000 migrants, while Republicans in Congress continued to block comprehensive immigration reform. Asked about airing the confrontation live during Hannity's show and Sliwa's claim, without proof, that the man being restrained was a migrant, let alone guilty of shoplifting, Fox News said in a statement that the situation took place during a live television broadcast and that the network had updated its audience as more information became available from NYPD. Don't know about that. Here's a little background. The Guardian Angels have been a presence in New York since the late 1970s, when Mr. Sliwa founded the group to patrol the streets and subway during an era of actual rampant crime. Mr. Sliwa admitted years ago that he had fabricated some of the group's early crime-fighting efforts to garner publicity and raise its profile. After cutting away from the confrontation Tuesday night, Mr. Hannity returned to Mr. Sliwa later in the broadcast for an explanation of what the audience had seen. Well, he had been shoplifting first. The Guardian Angels spotted him, stopped him, he resisted, and let's just say we gave him a little pain compliance, Mr. Sliwa said. His mother back in Venezuela felt the vibrations. Nice. He added, "We've got to take back 42nd Street, Sean. These illegals think they own this street. They think they rule the night. This is our country. Rule the night." What an idiot. Anyway, in an interview on Wednesday, Sliwa, who as the Republican nominee lost the 2021 election to Mr. Adams, but just, pointing out there is that danger. This a-hole could have been mayor on top of it all. He said he merely repeated what he had heard from people in the crowd because of what a responsible guy he is. He also said the Guardian Angels had confronted the man after he assaulted a female member of the group. It was after the initial encounter, he said, that people who gathered nearby had said the man had been stealing items from the stores in the area. A backpack found by the police, Mr. Sliwa said, contained about 10 items of children's clothing, still bearing anti-theft tags. Not very good ones, I guess. Asked why he would tell Mr. Hannity with such certainty what the man's background was, Sliwa said again that he had simply passed along what he'd been told. Is it possible he wasn't a migrant? Of course. But here we are. All right. Just thought I would update you on the fact that happened, which was disappointing enough. But hey, there's more. Where shall we start with? Why not this one? Here's something that was circulating yesterday. We haven't talked much about her, and I think we avoided discussing the whole libs of TikTok phenomenon a couple of times in the past. But Now, someone at NBC News has done some interesting research work and put this record together. After libs of TikTok posted, at least 21 bomb threats followed. In other words, where higher rate chick goes, bomb threats are soon to follow. And I don't know, did we mention the other day on the air that, I think so, that the Oklahoma State Department of Education has found her a job, a role for her to play in Oklahoma State politics, even though she's not from Oklahoma. And just like with bringing Chris Rufo in, where they go, trouble follows. And nothing keeps school kids of Oklahoma safer than bringing in the person who is a magnet for bomb threats. That's how we keep kids safe in Oklahoma. Bring in the bomb threats. And if only Oklahoma had experience with the trouble that comes along with being the target of bomb threats. But you have to go back a ways in order for people to remember that. But so here we go with another round of it. The FBI and local law enforcement said bomb threats across the country have tied up government resources even when they turn out to be hoaxes. And that is bad news. And David Ingram did the research necessary to put this piece together. Last March, police in Coralville, Iowa, which is the world capital for bomb threats prior to libs of TikTok intervening, I'm sure, investigated a bomb threat targeting a junior high school. Authorities brought in specially trained dogs to sniff for explosives and started looking into why someone might try to target the community's teachers and students. Law enforcement quickly determined that the threat was a hoax. Detective Hannah Dvorak from the Coralville Police Department arrived at a theory. It appears this all stems from a post made earlier this week by Haya Raychick and her Libs of TikTok account. Dvorak wrote in a report to her superiors. I'm assuming that she goes with the same pronunciation as the composer of the same name, Dvorak. Tell me if I'm wrong. Raychick, 29. Well, she's accomplished a lot in her 29 years, is not accused of making any bomb threats in Iowa or anywhere else, but about a day and a half before authorities responded to the threat at Coralville's Northwest Junior High, Raychick posted that school offers a, quote, pornographic book in its library that teaches kids about gay sex. Oh my God, it's happening. Was it happening? Was the book pornographic? Probably not, right? It's pretty hard to get pornographic materials past the librarians, but she said it had happened. And so the only obvious response, bomb it, bomb the building. Not remove the book, don't ban the book, don't look, don't ask questions, don't try to find out if there's something you can do to fix the situation. Bomb it immediately. It's just weird that happens over and 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 over again. I don't know how many overs I just gave, but I need to get to 21 in order to be accurate here. Okay, these are the books that they're going to give your kids to read in school, she wrote on the social media platform X. That's Twitter. People have frequently targeted the book in question. This book is gay. It's a coming out guide for LGBTQ teens with book bans going back years. Of course, it's going to draw notice. The Coralville detective wrote in her report that one of Raychick's supporters could have had a role in the bomb threat. Coralville was not alone. Officers and government officials in 4 other jurisdictions, Burbank, California, Minnetonka, Minnesota, Oklahoma City, wow, they never have bomb threats, and Tualatin, Oregon, maybe. You tell me about that pronunciation, told NBC News that they believe Raychick sparked threats in their localities with her posts on social media that digitally heckle people such as drag performers, LGBTQ teachers, and doctors who treat transgender patients. The name Libs of TikTok is a reference to the people Raychick mocks on social media, libs being short for liberal. While the direct inspirations for the threat are not known, at least in the way that courts are going to demand they be known, the timing suggests that Libs of TikTok posts have been used to pick targets. NBC News identified 33 instances starting in November of 2020 when people or institutions singled out by libs of TikTok later reported bomb threats or other violent intimidation. The threats, which on average came several days after tweets from libs of TikTok, targeted schools, libraries, hospitals, small businesses, and elected officials in 16 states, Washington, D.C., and the Canadian province of Ontario. Sorry, Canadians. 21 of the 33 threats were bomb threats, which most commonly targeted schools and were made via email. NBC News emailed Raychik on Monday seeking comment on the threats. She did not respond directly, but said in a post on Twitter that NBC News was working on a hit piece. And in fact, she spent the rest of the day accusing NBC News of terrorism, saying they're going to get people threatened and bomb threats will follow when they do. And when they do, should they be arrested or treated the way I've been treated here? But of course, that is essentially another a manifestation of my usual mantra that every Republican accusation is a confession. She is, of course, confessing to exactly what is being established here in this article. They try to do it to paint me as an extremist, to discredit me. This bomb threat narrative is getting really old, she wrote, adding a yawning face emoji. Well, arrest her for it and then it'll become new again. NBC News identified the threats in a review of local news sources, social media posts, and interviews with experts and victims. The 33 threats drew both local and national resources. Law enforcement agencies in at least 13 jurisdictions reported receiving FBI assistance to find the responsible person or people. A police spokesperson in Burbank said he believed the FBI still has an open investigation into the incident there. In an emailed statement, the Bureau has said it has, in general, observed an increase in threats of violence targeting institutions like hospitals and schools. And that just happens to be the target of most of her posts. How weird. There's an extensive investigation contained in the balance of the piece. You should absolutely take a look at it and keep the name in mind. I know, I really don't like to spend too much time on her, but yeah, she's somebody you're going to have to watch out for a while, and she's so happy that that's the case. Anyway, time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for today's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We'll be back tomorrow. Lots more stories to summarize for you before the big football weekend.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
How about some specifics for what's coming up next? Like, for instance, a suburban Seattle, Washington gun shop will pay $3 million for selling high-capacity ammunition magazines despite a state ban. It seems like these law-abiding gun owners aren't all that law-abiding after all, at least when they don't feel like it. Stay tuned.